Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of Open Wounds Podcast. Today we have a guest with us. His name is Chris. Is it Yadon? How do you pronounce it?
Yeah, you say it Yadon.
Yadon. Okay, Chris Yadon.
Yep.
He is an expert in sexual abuse, child sexual abuse, recovering from sexual abuse. And he's going to talk with us today about his work and how he's helping people and some tools and tips we can use in our adulthood and as well as parents for working through these things. So welcome to the podcast, Chris.
It's so good to be with you, Candice. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I like to usually ask, how did you end up in this field? Because usually it comes from some type of passion or an experience. So how did you end up working in this field to help other people with recovering?
Like many of us, it's a long and winding road, and mine's no different. And I'll take a long story and make it super short. If we go back to my own upbringing, there were all sorts of challenges in my family, and as a result, I personally, the way I dealt with those challenges is I learned to numb emotionally, which is also a common symptom for many survivors of child sexual abuse. So I have that in common with survivors. That emotional numbing kind of made me the good boy, if you can think of it that way. And as the good boy, I kind of got through life pretty unscathed, if you will, or at least that's what I thought, right? I didn't cause trouble. I didn't want to cause any trouble in my home. So I came out of childhood into young adulthood and had a bit of this inaccurate view of how I grew up. I viewed it as very idyllic. I grew up next to a cherry orchard. Free reign, was a latchkey kid, spent more time with my shoes off than on, kind of doing what I wanted to do. But in my young adulthood, I started to learn more about some of the things that were going on in my family. I saw some things, but there were some things I hadn't seen. And one of the most alarming was some of my family who had experienced child sexual abuse. And I remember in that moment feeling an intense amount of anger. I was angry that it happened. I was angry that those that were responsible to deal with it kind of looked the other way, didn't really deal with it. And I had a lot of anger towards society in general, that society was telling my family that this is not okay to talk about, this is not okay to deal with, and you have to sweep this under the rug. And that's what happened. That's what happened in our family. But as it goes with many of us, anger is a great catalyst for action, if you can channel it. And that's really my story. I didn't start in the public sector. I didn't start doing social services. Started in the for-profit sector, but I found my way here. And 10 years ago, helped some good friends of mine start an organization by the name of Saprea that specifically focuses on liberating individuals in society from child sexual abuse and its lasting impacts. And when they approached me, it was one of the easiest yeses in my life, because it took my personal experience with some of my business acumen I gained in other places, and we were able to combine it and start the work we do at Saprea.
Nice. Yeah. So I think what's unique about the organization that you help run is that it's focused on helping adults who are dealing with the repercussions. I know a lot of like the Children's Justice Center and domestic violence, a lot of these places are helping people who have just experienced it and have maybe just come forward. But yours is helping people who maybe this happened decades ago and they're just now realizing, I want to get help. I want to process this and work on this. So can you talk a little bit about how your program is different than what we typically see?
Yeah, you outlined kind of a key point of it, and maybe I'll emphasize a little bit of what you said. So our founders, part of their founder story is they had a loved one who was an adult who had experienced abuse as a child, and they were seeing the impacts in their friend's life, and they had that moment that we often have of, hey, this isn't fair. Like, she's still dealing with this
Mm-hmm.
when the person that did it's kind of living their life and moving on and doing their thing, and she's still dealing with the repercussions of this. Somebody should do something about this. And that shifted to, well, I guess we should be that somebody.
Mm.
And that was really an impetus for them starting it. And so we started with that focus in mind of the adult survivor who had unresolved trauma. What we didn't realize at that time is that that was the largest demographic of survivors, that
Wow.
most children don't disclose until well into their adulthood. So the largest demographic of survivors of child sexual abuse have unresolved trauma that they're carrying into adulthood. And the only services really available to them at the time when we looked at the market was therapy, individual therapy, which is critical.
Yeah.
But by itself, typically not sufficient. There are other things that need to surround individual therapeutic experience. So we sought after to build the programs and services that could really wrap around that survivor and augment the individual therapeutic experience. We can get more into it as you wish, but some of the key things that we saw is we needed to build communities. So many survivors feel alone and feel like they're the only one, which just adds to the shame and the stigma of what they're dealing with. And our chief clinical officer, Dr. Betsy Kanarowski, has a saying that I love that just kind of speaks to this principle of community. She says, trauma happens in isolation, healing happens in community. And that's not just a nice little quip. It's actually founded in really, really solid research. And not just with sexual abuse, with lots of traumatic experiences, that community is really important to provide holistic healing. So that was one of the problems we were seeking to solve, is how do we create communities of survivors that can support one another and learn to heal together. The other thing that we were really noticing that was a gap is the individual therapeutic experience is really geared toward diagnose, treat. There wasn't a lot of room for what we refer to in the clinical space as psychoeducation. And psychoeducation is basically just education around whatever topic you're working on or have been diagnosed with, to help the individual understand about how that diagnosis, whatever it is impacting them. And for this, what we saw is so many survivors were dealing with symptoms of unresolved trauma, but they weren't connecting those symptoms back to the trauma itself. And we found that as we help them understand how their symptoms connected to their trauma, it opened their world. First of all, it helped them go, maybe my body's just doing what it's designed to do. And this isn't great and I need to learn to manage it, but I'm not broken.
Right.
And those are different constructs.
Yeah.
But it also gives them the basis to learn how to start managing their symptoms. So it was that community, that education, and then exposure to experiential learning. So things that typically don't happen or can't happen regularly in a therapy office. So things like body work. So you've got, somatic practices like mindfulness, yoga, martial arts. So introducing those other types of experiences that are really beneficial to healing from trauma that don't happen organically in a therapy office. So those were kind of the three pillars that we built our programs around in order to wrap around that survivor and their individual therapy experience.
Wow. Okay. You touched on like 4 different things. I was like, ooh, I want to go back and talk about this, but now there's so many of them because you were so thorough. The first thing that I think is really important for adults who are working through this is, like you said, the isolation and feeling like they're the only one. I think in part because the abuser tends to create that secrecy and that shame. It's inherent in the abuse they have experienced that we don't tell, this is our little secret, no one should know, it's just between you and me, or whatever the verbiage that the abuser has used, creates a sense of like, I can't talk to anyone about this, no one is supposed to know about this, and I must be the only one, right? Even though statistically we know that that's completely inaccurate and false. Most of the time, whoever is the perpetrator has a trail of people behind them, right? And so I think that's so important because, like you said, when you are going to individual therapy, it's just you and the therapist. You're not hearing. And most times therapists are trained not to disclose personal history. They don't want to make the session about themselves. So you aren't getting to hear from other people who've gone through, like I remember going to support groups way back in the day, and you get to hear this story and you're like, oh my God, that's exactly what I went through. And it really, really helps you feel like, okay, this wasn't just me. I didn't do something to deserve this. I didn't bring this upon myself. So that's so impactful. The other thing I wanted to touch on was the holistic approach that you guys have. It's so important because what I found, and even though I didn't have a history of sexual abuse, but with the trauma, the way it's stored in my body, like I had done decades of cognitive behavior therapy, but because my body was still reacting from that somatic fight or flight place, I could tell it all day long here, but in here, it was doing a completely different thing. I used to tell my therapist that it's like my brain and my body are not communicating and they're not on the same page. So the fact that you guys have tied that in, I think is so crucial and so needed. Yeah, I'm excited to hear more about the program. So how are you all funding this? Because typically therapy will not pay for not therapy, insurance will not pay for anything beyond traditional talk therapy or those types of EMDR or things like that. So how are you all providing these services to the people that you're reaching?
So we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We're a charity, and we have very generous donors. All our services are free.
Wow.
And so we don't charge for our services. We don't bill them to insurance, some for the very reasons you described. So we have to have the support of the community and generosity of donors. And that started with our founders, who historically are our largest donors and continue to be at this day. They really set the table to solve this problem. And they made it possible for us to build programs that worked and that we could offer to others, and to really let us focus on getting our programming right before we focused too much on the fundraising side. Now we're at a stage in our organization where we're trying to scale and we've gotten to the tens of thousands of survivors with our direct services and millions with our online services, but we've got to get to hundreds of thousands with our direct services and the billions with our online services. So that takes funding, and we constantly are seeking the support of the community. And our message to the community is pretty clear, that when you decide to help a survivor of child sexual abuse overcome their trauma, you're offering compassion. It's a form of compassion. And there's actually some emerging research. It's not been around long enough for us to really hang our hat on it, but it's interesting to watch what's happening that says even that compassionate start, just someone saying to a survivor, you're worth my money to heal, actually starts the healing process before they even start any work.
Wow.
Because the alternative messages have been so strong in their life of, this is your fault. You deserve this. It's too sensitive to talk about. It should be shameful. All those negative messages that have been hitting them over and over again, when someone gives an alternative message, a compassionate message that says, you know what, you're worth it to me, and I'm going to fund you engaging in this service or engaging in this resource, it actually starts the healing process for survivors, which is fascinating.
Yeah, that's phenomenal that you guys have connected that. I think going back to the other thing you talked about, where most people who've experienced this don't disclose until adulthood. Um, and I think that ties into so often the perpetrator is someone that is very close and enmeshed into the family system. If it's not a direct parent or caregiver, it's a close relative or a pastor or a coach or somebody where if the child were to come forward or the adolescent, um, it would really just rip their whole life apart, so to speak. And even if they had come forward, what I noticed, because I did foster care for a little bit of time, and I noticed the kids would just kind of drop a little tiny bomb and then walk away. And I'd be
Yep.
going, what did they just say? But it was like they didn't feel safe enough to say the whole thing. So they would give me just this little weird breadcrumb clue. And I would be trying to figure out what it all meant and how it connected. But I think for so many people who've experienced this, there wasn't a way to safely disclose in childhood. So they did feel the need to wait until adulthood. And then, compounded over time, the shame and all the things that happen. For someone to say, you are worthy of my time, energy, effort, and money so that you can live a more fulfilled, whole, better functioning life, I would say, is so important to let them know, like, this is important to me so that you can feel better. The other thing too that you brought up was the experiencing symptoms or life difficulties that they haven't quite connected to it. And, things like poor sleep, or like you said, numbing, or substance abuse, or other things. What are the other common things you see people coming in with saying, this is really impacting my day-to-day life and I feel like it's impacting my functioning, but at the end of the day, I didn't realize it was connected to what happened to me in my past?
Yeah, so on our website, because I won't be able to talk about all of them because there's too many, but there's 17 common symptoms that we that we draw a correlation back to child sexual abuse. You've named a few. Substance use is a big one. Difficult relationship with your body. You talked about being disconnected with your body. The term we use in the clinical space is reintegration, where you bring that brain and body back together. So that disconnection is common. Similar to that, there's a type of shutting down called dissociation, which can range anywhere from, kind of just checking out a little bit to all the way to feeling like you're having an out-of-body experience, observing yourself from the point of view of a third party. Sexual intimacy issues, shame, communication issues, lots of relationship dysfunction shows up. Physical pain can be a symptom, specific types of physical pain. Sleep issues. Loneliness is a big one. I'll stop there, but that just gives you a little bit of a sampling. And if there's any of those in particular you want to dive into a little deeper, we can. But if people go to our website and go to our healing online healing services, they'll find these 17 symptoms, and they select one of those symptoms and click on it. It will actually go through in that spirit of psychoeducation using video and text. It help them connect what it has to do with their child sexual abuse. And then at the end of that, it gives them at least 3 tools or resources they can do to manage that symptom.
Nice.
So it's not just identifying it, let's also give you tools that help you manage it.
Yeah. And I think there's something too that you touched on in another podcast that I listened to, and I can link that as well if somebody wants to go down the rabbit hole and learn more. But you talked about the differences that you see with the male population and the female population, and how that plays out, that symptomatically they may be different, and how it's being expressed in their life and how they're managing it can come across a little differently. Is that something that you guys, when you're taking somebody in and doing an assessment on them, you're really trying to focus on them specifically? It's not just like, hey, everybody walks through the door gets all these 10 things, or is it very tailored to that person that's coming through?
Yeah, so when we do our programming, it's very much geared towards you finding 2 to 3 things that really resonate with you and then deep diving on those 2 to 3 things. So if I took our longest standing program, which is a 4-day retreat followed by 9 weeks of online classes or online learning afterwards, uh, the survivor will get exposed in those 4 days in that intensive portion. They'll get exposed to anywhere from 10 to 12 different methods of healing. And our hope isn't that they go home and do all 12. In fact, that's the exact opposite of our hope. Our hope is that of those 10 to 12, they'll really deeply connect with 2 to 3. And then they'll go home using our online resources and start incorporating that as a practice in their healing. So someone that comes to that program may really connect with trauma sensitive yoga and grounding techniques and mindfulness walks. Let's just say it's those 3 things. We want them to take those 3 things, and our clinical team even helps them in their final visit with them before they go back home to put together a plan to identify and take action on those things that they connected with the most. So that's the approach we take. Let's give you broad exposure to a lot of different possibilities. Let's find a few things that really resonate with you, and then let's dive deeper on those items.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful because, like you said, not every tool is going to work for every person. And some things are going to be, like you said, feel more comfortable and like they provide more quick relief than another tool. I really like too that you said that there's like a long process, because I think so many people are suffering and they want immediate relief, but it does take a long time to work through these things and start to see improvement. So do you have, any tips for people who seem to kind of like fall off the wagon, or they have a hard time sticking to? Because I know that's been something I've dealt with, is like I'll get into something and I'll really like it, but the follow through is so difficult for me to maintain, like being consistent and going back to it and remembering that I have that as a tool. So what do you all do to help people with those kinds of things?
From our point of view, this is one of the biggest reasons healing happens in community, because community provides support, encouragement, and accountability. And that accountability in a loving way is very, very valuable. So if you took like one of the cohorts, going back to that same service I just talked about, one of our retreats, they're done in cohorts, typically 8 women at a time in a group. Many of these cohorts stay connected indefinitely, and they're a text away, a phone call away to say, I'm having a rough one today. And the great thing about these cohorts is it's for survivors by survivors. You don't even have to explain yourself to them because they get each other.
Yeah.
So it's not like another person that's in your support group, not to minimize this, but let's say they have a spouse or a partner, and that spouse or partner hasn't been abused. That spouse or partner may be really loving and want to be really supportive, but they may not understand the same way that another survivor understands.
Yeah.
And having that type of support of someone that gets you is super valuable to maintaining momentum and keeping you going when you run into those walls, or when things get hard, or you get triggered and you're having a crappy day. That type of support is super valuable, and why that community piece of healing is so valuable to a survivor's journey.
Yeah, I think that's crucial. Now that we're saying this, I have some supports in my life that I realized, once I built the trust in that I could be comfortable enough to go back and rely on these people over and over again, it does help them. They will remind you of the tools, and they will remind you, Have you tried this today? Have you tried that today? Which brings me to a point I wanted to talk about earlier and that I forgot because there was so much we were covering. But the trust issue is, I think, especially for those with complex PTSD, because the repeated abuse that's coming from people who you were supposed to be able to trust and rely on, and they were supposed to provide you with love. Instead, you were taken advantage of or abused by them. So how does somebody find the capacity to trust, right? Like when you're coming into this new program or you're coming into a support group, it's very hard to think that these people aren't also going to do something that feels like they're taking advantage of me, or I'm going to end up becoming a victim yet again, right? So what are some tools you guys use to build the trust?
Yeah, the first thing is helping individuals understand that the struggle with trust typically comes from two sources. One, you already emphasized, and that's betrayal. When trust is betrayed, it makes it hard to trust again. The other source, and this is particularly relevant to childhood trauma, which is really for those of us that deal with post-traumatic stress of any kind, it's usually, not always, but most often rooted in childhood trauma. We have to understand that that trauma was interrupting really important developmental cycles that lead to forming bonds and attachment with others. So that can also be why it's so hard to trust. So you have the betrayal, and if the trauma happened at those critical developmental stages, you also have that it never really matured or was nurtured at the stage it was designed to be nurtured at. So trust is one that we believe it can be addressed in group settings, and I'll tell you how we do that, but this is one that I think really is specially designed to be dealt with in individual therapy. Not that there aren't things around it, but individual therapy is really critical to address trust and how to build trust, particularly because it can be wrapped up in so many details that sometimes the only way to get at it is to unwrap some of those details to figure out what the source of the trust challenge is so that we can actually solve it. With that said, some of the things we do to build trust, if you take our support group model, which is run by survivors for survivors, everything in it is, there's 27 weeks of content, and everything in it is carefully scripted to provide group safety. So it creates an accountability platform. If you come into a group and the group leaders aren't following the script, it gives the participants the ability to say, oh, maybe this group isn't for me, or to hold those group leaders accountable. So there's really good scripting, not to make it robotic, but to provide safety. If you take, for example, our retreat program, it's run by licensed clinical professionals, even though they're not doing therapy during that retreat. They're doing that psychoeducation, that experiential, and that community work. They are there solely. The reason why we have them do it as opposed to just a generic staff member is they are specially trained to create those environments of safety where trust can be honored. So we do a lot in our programming to build environments where people can trust, but trust is one of those really, really challenging and deep struggles that also is likely going to need a lot of individual therapy to work through.
Yeah. So when you talked about the betrayal, I think that one's pretty obvious. Someone in the person's life has betrayed their trust and violated it, and they feel used or taken advantage of or abandoned or whatever that was. But the developmental thing, I think, is so crucial when we're talking especially about complex PTSD, because I remember being like in trying to learn things, trying to learn algebra or trying to learn difficult subject matter. And I literally felt like my brain was broken as a kid. Like I just couldn't get it. And then as an adult, and I have my own children, and I was sitting working with them on their homework, and suddenly, decades into therapy and my own process of healing, I could understand the concepts and I could learn them. And I was like, isn't it crazy that my brain didn't feel safe enough in that moment to learn these concepts? It was too focused on survival or hypervigilance or whatever. So I think, that's a crucial thing. in that it's almost like we're relearning these things that we kind of didn't get to learn in childhood now as adults. And there's no shame. It's nothing wrong with us. It's just that our body was in a protective state during that time. And now it's kind of like going backwards in time and figuring out where those gaps were and helping to rebuild the foundation. So it sounds like your program does a very excellent job at, figuring out where all these little needs are happening that all make this cumulative effect in someone's day-to-day life as an adult.
I would love to connect a dot with what you just said, a really important dot, if I can.
For sure.
So, two things. Number one, the brain. We've learned through really, really good research that the brain has what's called neuroplasticity, which is a much more complex topic than I understand. But fundamentally, neuroplasticity says the brain has the ability to learn or relearn things throughout our life. So there's so much hope in your story, right? And I know it sounds simple. It's just algebra, right? But that's neuroplasticity in action. Your brain, for various reasons, was not able to learn it at that previous stage in your life, but here you are as an adult, and it's able to learn and grow and continue to build. That's one of the beautiful things about healing is our brain can learn to see the world differently, learn new concepts, absorb new things that previously were hard or felt unsafe to us. So that's one connection. The second connection that I think is really important is when we are in our traumatic response, what's happening is the stress responses of the body go into one of two states. They either go into what's called hyperarousal, which is our fight and flight, or hypoarousal, which is freeze or shut down. When we're in either of those states, our biological drivers to connect with others also shut down.
Wow.
So we only connect with other human beings when we're in when our stress responses are in a regulated. I'm trying to think of non-clinical terms. I'll just say a regulated or neutral state. That's a better way to say it. So a big part of understanding bonding and trust with others is we've got to get regulated because the things that cause us to bond and connect and attach and attune with other human beings, we can't do that if we're hyper aroused or hypo aroused. Our systems that connect with others and build trust shut down are biological symptoms. This isn't just a thought process. It's a physiological response shut down when we're in those stages. So, when you were doing algebra in 7th grade, you may have been in a stress response, right? So your logical brain's not going to be able to process certain things, but you're also probably not in a place of trust with others. So you're always on guard, in your surroundings and trying to stay vigilant.
That's phenomenal that you talked about that, because I've never heard it put that way, where and I know just because I kind of put the puzzle pieces together as an adult, like when I was in a space safe enough to look back and kind of process, that I was almost always either in hyper or hypo. There was very rarely any time at all where I was in that neutral calm state. And usually it's when I was alone and no one was around, because that's the only time I felt safe enough to kind of let it all go, so to speak, let go of the hypervigilance or let go of the collapse and closure. So the being able to connect with people can only happen in that mid window is so crucial, because if you're never there, you can't ever really have connection with people, which makes sense why the lack of trust and the whole foundational thing of feeling unsafe around other people, right? So I think that's really important, because I spent decades in therapy, which was but I was still either hyper or hypo, right? I didn't know how to regulate with the vagus nerve and all those nervous
Yep.
system calming things that I've learned later in life. I don't know. I'm hoping that now, as we learn about the nervous system and how it relates to our bodies and our brains, that therapists are being taught those things, because I think decades ago they weren't. It was just like, talk about the problem and get the person to trust you and everything will work out. But when you're constantly bouncing between these two, you really can't get to that neutral state to feel calm and trust somebody. So that's a great point that you make there.
Yeah. And if any of your listeners really want to deep dive on that concept, Dr. Dan Siegel is out of UCLA, uses a metaphor called the window of tolerance. And he talks about trying to stay in that window or regulate into that window. And when we get outside of the window, we get in our stress response. It's a great metaphor to make sense of something that frankly is very complex, but for me, it's really simplified it in a way that makes it easy to understand and even explain.
Yeah, that's great. And I think the other thing I wanted to talk about was, like, when you're working with these clients and they're starting to integrate all these things, do you feel like they start to connect the dots, like, oh, well, I thought it was just affecting my sleep, but now I'm realizing it's also affecting these and these and these and these other things, right? Like, it's kind of starts this domino effect of realizing how pervasive these experiences have been to the rest of our lives.
Absolutely. In fact, it's a little bit sad and frustrating for some of our clients, but it's also very liberating for them. One of the most common phrases we hear in our retreat program is maybe we're on day 2 or day 3, and a participant will say something to the effect of, I've been in therapy for X years, 10 years, 20 years, 17 years, right? Why has my therapist never taught me this?
Yeah.
And they are so frustrated, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's because they finally feel liberated from something that didn't make sense to them.
Mm.
And using their words, not mine, their alternative is, I'm broken.
Yeah.
I'm crazy. Those are the types of words they use because they can't make sense of what's happening.
Mm.
But as soon as you unlock what's happening to them and how it connects to their trauma, it's like the ultimate light bulb goes on.
Mm.
And it's so liberating for them. And it doesn't take all the shame and stigma away, but immediately starts eating at that shame and stigma, like, oh, okay, well, my body did what it was supposed to do. And yeah, it sucks that I still have to deal with this, and it's hard. And I've got to learn to manage it. But it just did what it was supposed to do, and I understand why it did it.
Yeah.
And I understand why what I'm dealing with today is a result of that. And because I now understand that, I have an opportunity to make a different choice in my life. And that's very empowering.
Yeah, yeah. And there was something too that I wanted to talk about before we even started, because I saw this so prevalently with my work with kids when I was doing foster care and when I was a social worker, is that oftentimes as a society, we think of child sexual abuse as from an adult to a child, but it's oftentimes other children, because those children have been victimized at some time from some person, and because they don't know how to express what's happened to them, they like play it out with other kids, right? So when you're dealing with people who are coming forward and say, I had this experience, but it wasn't my dad or my grandpa or my uncle, it was my brother, or it was my cousin, or it was the next door neighbor, it becomes really muddy, because you kind of can't be mad at another kid, right? The other kid was just doing what a kid does, and it's not like they had, like, it's very different, I think, when you think of the typical predator who's planned and thorough and methodical, and they're grooming. But when it's another child that you've been victimized by, it becomes very hard to be like, well, how do I process all this? There's no one to be mad at, so to speak, right? Like, we were both victims in this scenario. So how do you help people who that was their experience, because I know statistically that's a lot of people have had that happen to them.
Yeah, and when it comes to sexual abuse, we believe it's the majority. So I'll share a couple of statistics and then get to your question. And so children who disclose as children, they disclose typically at about a rate of 30% of abuse disclosed by children is of other minors abusing them or harming them in some way. By the time they become adults, that gets as high as 70%.
Wow.
So that discrepancy, first of all, one thing that we take away from that discrepancy is children, we believe, and we don't know this for sure, but we believe the reason why there's such a lower disclosure rate while they're children is many times they don't see that action as abusive. They don't know how to make sense of it because the power dynamics are different, just as you described. So they may not interpret it to be abuse until they're an adult looking back and going, that wasn't okay, right? So they don't even recognize it as abuse as children, which can really change how they process what's happening. Here's the reality on the healing side. When it comes to healing, we really see no differences of those that do develop trauma symptoms, whether it's child on child, teen on teen sexual assault, or adult on child. The symptoms can be just as severe in any of those. So it's more to do with how the child processes the experience that determines, or frankly doesn't process the experience, that determines the longer term impacts. But in terms of helping them, yes, there are challenges where a survivor's like, hey, it wasn't really their fault. What we try to do is help survivors hold multiple things at the same time and not force themselves to explain it one way or the other. They can say, so-and-so harmed me and it hurt and it caused damage and they shouldn't have done that, and say they were harmed, they've moved on in their life and are living a healthy, productive life. Both of those can be true.
Yeah.
And we don't have to make it one or the other. The same thing actually happens a lot in familial abuse. Yeah. Where, a survivor may repair a relation. Let's say it was their dad that abused them and they repair that relationship. A survivor may deeply love their father, who was their abuser. And some people like to say, well, that's not really love. There's this unhealthy attachment happening there. But that's not actually what we find. They can genuinely love somebody, reconcile, forgive, whatever words you want to use, let go, and still hold the fact that this person harmed me and they were unsafe. Both things can be true. And we as humans, it's because of our cognitive dissonance, want to make it one or the other. Yeah. And it's just not. It's not. And so our approach is the survivor gets to decide that. We don't get to tell them what they should feel. We don't get to tell them, oh, you should hate your father. Yeah. I know you said you love him, but you don't really love him. You should hate him because he betrayed you. That's not our right to tell a survivor that. Our right is to take the survivor where they're at and help them with wherever they're at and help them get to a place of healthy living. And so that's how we approach it. So if they say they love their father and he's the one that harmed them, we teach them to hold both truths simultaneously and get to a point of healthy living. Yeah.
I think that's so crucial because, like you said, we tend to be black and white, all or nothing. This person is evil or this person is good, or I love them or I hate them. There's usually not, like, we have a hard time existing in that gray area, in that middle area. And that also brings up this complexity of, like, how do I navigate relationships as I move into adulthood with these people who may very well still be in my circles? I know a lot of people that I've talked to said, well, I don't want to go to the family barbecue because that person's going to be there and I don't want to be around them. Or I don't want my kids going around that person, because now I'm afraid my kids will also become victimized by that. So, as we try to wrap up here, if somebody is a parent and they have children, can you give some helpful tips about, number one, teaching the child to have that body autonomy and know when a boundary violation is happening, either with a child or with another adult? And also, if a child does come forward and says something to them that's alarming, how can the parent navigate that, and where can they go for resources? Or, because we talked a little bit about before we recorded about intergenerational trauma. It's very, very common for, it happened to me, it happened to grandma, and now it's happening to my daughter. Yep. And these cycles pass through families. And when an adult has decided, I'm going to intervene, I want to break this cycle of sexual abuse happening within my family, there is an intervention that has to happen, so to speak. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So first of all, I'll just tell your listeners, we could talk for hours about the prevention side of this, and we have a lot of great resources on our website that I'll direct them to. I'll refer to a few things. So when it comes to protecting our kids, and you brought up the example of the family environment, should we go? Should we not go? If we go, how do we deal with that environment? There are 5 principles we talk about in prevention. The first is assess risky situations and practice navigating them. So basically, you're identifying that family environment as a risky situation, either risky for abuse, risky to be triggered from past trauma, or whatever the risk is, right? So it's getting really good at assessing what situations are risky and then practice navigating them. So that practice can come in a lot of different forms. It can come with a therapist. It can come, with your own family before you go. You actually have to start talking about it and acknowledging it if you're going to deal with it. Our second one you also brought up, which is great. It's like you're teaching prevention just in your comments, and that is teach our children to set, hold, and respect boundaries. Boundaries is a big conversation in our country right now. There's anytime a movement kind of reaches the general public, it sometimes gets morphed into something that it's not. And we're seeing that a little bit with boundaries. But the principles behind setting, holding, and respecting boundaries is core to prevention. So helping a child learn how to set boundaries, knowing as a parent which boundaries you need to set, meaning which boundaries a child's not ready to set. You can't expect them to do all the boundary setting. There's setting we have to do. So understanding which ones they can do that are age appropriate and which ones you need to do as a parent is really critical. And we provide guidance on our website as to, what's age appropriate for kids at different stages. So it's setting, then holding, right? Holding the boundary, and then respecting. And that comes back to your earlier comment about children harming children, meaning there's a child being harmed, but on the other side, there's a child harming.
Right.
So a big part of that is I've got to think about my kids in context of I don't want them to be harmed, but I also don't want them to be the one that does the harm.
Right.
And that's hard for us to think about as parents. We don't ever want to think about, oh, well, our kids could be the one harming. It's just as important to teach the other side of it, which is where respecting boundaries comes in. So those are number 1 and number 2 of the 5. And I'll let your listeners go dig into the other 3. But that's where you start. And that's where prevention starts, is with those 2 principles. Get really good at assessing risky situations and practice navigating those. And learn how to set, hold, and respect boundaries, and teach your kids to do the same.
Excellent. And I will link your website. I did want to ask, where are you all based out of?
Yeah, so our work, our headquarters or home office is in Utah, but we do quite a bit of work out of the South as well, out of Atlanta specifically. We're a national and even international organization. So when you look at our resources, we've had our direct services, meaning people actually consuming a class or engaging in a retreat, come from 42 different countries in all 50 states. when you look at our digital resources, like those symptom-based resources I told you, or our digital prevention resources, we've had people consume them from over 200 countries. So
Wow.
we're really, we have international reach, but home for most of us is Utah. We do have several employees spread across the country, particularly in the South.
So is the retreats that you spoke about, those are occurring in Utah if somebody wanted to participate?
They are. We do a few remote retreats, particularly when we have a partner that wants to do that with us in other parts of the country. But if they want to come to us, those happen in Utah.
And the digital online resources that you're referring to, I'll link the whole website so people can peruse it in there. If somebody's just like, yeah, I had this epiphany, my therapist has never talked to me about this, they could go to your website and utilize your resources and learn about the somatic exercises or start to explore that on their own then?
Absolutely. So our approach is meet people where they're at. So if you look at like healing as an example, they can from home engage in our healing resources, and those are organized by symptom, like I described to you. We also have a healing webinar that can be delivered virtually, so they can do that from home. Think of it as a half-day introductory session into healing, or those can be done in person in a workshop. Often we do that with partners. We have survivor-led support groups that have been formed in a lot of different places across the country and even internationally that are for survivors by survivors. That's 27 weeks of curriculum. There's some that are done in person, some that are done virtually, and some that are hybrid. And then our retreat program, which primarily is delivered in person in Utah, but we occasionally do those remote retreats as well. And then our prevention resources are all available virtually.
Wow. So basically, anywhere someone is in the world, they should be able to utilize, and everything's free on your website. So they should be able to just dive right in and get to work on those things if they'd like to. I'm really excited to hear the work you guys are doing because I think it's so needed, and especially because it's free and it's global, anyone around the world, because we know that, this isn't just a United States or a Western problem. This is something that people around the globe face. So I'm really happy to hear that. And if anyone wants to donate to your program, I'm sure that's welcome as well. And I thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this. Like you said, this is such a dense topic. I'm sure we could have done like 4 episodes on it. But if anyone wants to go Google Chris Yadon on YouTube, there's other episodes he's done as well. So you can learn some more about that. And I will link the show notes for your website. So thank you so much, Chris, for being on, and thanks everyone for listening. And I hope you have a great day.
Thanks.